I am. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Myron Belkind. I'm an adjunct professor at the George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs, a former international bureau chief for the Associated Press, and the 107th president of the National Press Club. No need to applaud. The National Press Club is the world's leading professional organization for journalists committed to our profession's future through our programming with events such as this, while fostering a free press worldwide. For more information about the National Press Club, please visit our website at press.org. On behalf of our members worldwide, I'd like to welcome our speaker and all the guests of our speaker at the head table and in the audience. And I'd like to just remind you that our head table includes guests of our speaker as well as working journalists who are club members. And so if you hear applause in our audience, I'd note that members of the general public are attending, so it's not necessarily evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. And we always make this announcement because we feel it's important to do so. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences. You can follow the action on Twitter using the hashtag NPCLunch. After our guest speech concludes, we'll have a question and answer period. I will ask as many questions as time permits. Now it's time to introduce our head table guests. When I do, each one will stand briefly as their names are announced. From your right, 1 minute, please. From your right, Bob Booth, retired former managing editor, National Geographic magazine. Just please hold your applause. Maureen Lorenzetti, communications lead of the Governance Global Practice of the World Bank Group. Yahya Musa, founder and president of Africa Today TV, which launches its operations on Tuesday, August 5th, and I'm also pleased to introduce Mr. Musa as a new National Press Club member. Mr. Jean-Jacques Bouya, Minister of Infrastructures. Margaret Ryan, North American correspondent, Interfax Energy, London. Minister Mugani Adelaide, the Minister of, 1 minute. No, we have it right. Yep. We have, before every head table announcement, we double check everything. The minister is Minister of Small and Medium Businesses and Handicrafts and former Minister of Trade. Donna Leinwand-Legier, reporter for U.S. Today and vice chair of the National Press Club Speakers Committee and former president of the National Press Club. And next to her, between her and the president, is Claudia Lembuma Sasu Nguesso, who is assisting with our translation services today and who helped plan this lunch. Thank you so much. Skipping over our speaker for a moment, Tony Cerise, Director of Academic Seminars at the Washington Center for Internships and Academic Seminars. Gilbert Ondongo, State Minister, Economy and Finance. Heidi Shoup, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of DC and a new Press Club member. Nashwan Talib, journalist and TV news anchor for the Middle East Broadcasting Network. Tina Masok, Senior Communications Officer of the United Nations Foundation. Last year, the New York Times listed the Republic of Congo on its list of 46 places to visit for its remarkable safaris, the world's second largest tropical rainforest, and its rich culture. But beyond the tourist attraction, our guest today, President Denis Sassou Nguesso, has for many years made stability, modernization, and industrialization his priorities in the Republic. Economic progress in the last 10 years has led to a cancellation of large amounts of debts through the International Monetary Fund. That has allowed the country to dedicate larger percentages of its budget to infrastructure development than it has been able to invest in any other time in the Republic's history. President Sassou Nguesso's current 7-year term will end in 2016, and it's his second and final term allowable under the Republic's current constitution. His last term has focused on a new hope to bring peace and stability to the Republic after years of unrest and civil war. In his latest term, his focus has been on the path to the future, to attempt to invest in aging infrastructure, further reduce the still high rate of poverty, and to pursue efforts at peace building and predicting human rights. He also has worked to resolve conflicts in the Central African region and promote peace and development throughout the area. President Sassou Nguesso joins us today in advance of next week's U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, where President Obama, who visited Africa last summer, hopes to focus on trade and investment in Africa and highlight America's commitment to Africa's security, its democratic development, and its people. President Sassou Nguesso joins the ranks of other heads of state to speak to the National Press Club, including many U.S. presidents, Indira Gandhi, Yasser Arafat, Nelson Mandela, Nikita Khrushchev, Fidel Castro, and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. The National Press Club is truly known as a place where news happens. I'd like to thank the World Affairs Council for partnering with us today to bring President Sassou Nguesso here today. Please join me in welcoming President Denis Sassou Nguesso to the National Press Club.
Madame la Présidente de World Affairs Council, Monsieur le Président du National Press Club, je vous remercie de l'honneur que vous avez bien voulu me faire en m'invitant à prendre la parole devant votre respectable institution. Vous offrez ainsi à une voix africaine, la mienne en l'occurrence, l'opportunité de communiquer avec le peuple américain sur un sujet majeur, un sujet à caractère universel, la paix et la sécurité. Le caractère universel de la paix et de la sécurité est en soi évident et indéniable. Le président Franklin Roosevelt l'avait déjà si bien défini lorsqu'au début de la Seconde Guerre mondiale, il déclarait, je cite, « Où que la paix soit rompue, c'est le monde entier qui est menacé. » Fin de citation. Distingués invités, Mesdames et Messieurs, aujourd'hui encore, en Europe, au Moyen-Orient, en Asie, en Amérique latine et en Afrique, des peuples s'entre-déchirent, des bombes étouffent la voix des hommes, semant la mort, la désolation et des rancœurs tenaces que le temps, parfois, peine à effacer.
The bombs fall and they sow death, desolation, and resentment so bitter that time can hardly erase them. Given the heated state of present world affairs, it is quite proper that in this center, in this mecca of the American press, we ponder the question of peace and security in Central Africa. This is a region of the hemisphere, of course, where my own country is found, the Republic of Congo. And in speaking to you today, I will highlight three main points. First of all, I will refer to the state of affairs in Central Africa in general, underscoring a number of actions undertaken by the Congo in its contribution to the resolution of conflict and the consolidation of peace and stability in the region. Secondly, I will evoke the multidimensional character of the security challenge in Africa. And thirdly, and in conclusion, I will take the liberty, in a spirit of humility and friendship, to invite America to deepen its links with Africa for the sake of bolstering our respective interests. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by giving you a clear idea of the African region that we're going to be talking about this afternoon. Central Africa is at the very heart of the African continent. It links the North and the South. It spreads from the Gulf of Guinea to the Great Lakes region. It offers significant natural resources on its surface and underground. The tropical forests of the Congo Basin represent 250 million hectares. That is properly 40% of the overall Central African region, and constitutes, in fact, the planet's second ecological lung, right after the Amazon region. Now, Central Africa includes some 10 countries: Angola, Burundi, the Cameroon, Congo, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Central African Republic, Rwanda, São Tomé et Príncipe, Chad. All these countries represent 6,500,000 square kilometers and a population of some 150 million, mostly very young people, which certainly is a great advantage for the region, one of its greatest assets. Now, most of the countries of Central Africa are at peace, but the peace is nonetheless threatened by the persistence of conflicts in the Central African Republic and to its east by that in the Central African, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Terrorism, piracy on the seas, and other forms of violence remain constant sources of concern. The deep reasons for this insecurity and conflict in Central Africa and everywhere in Africa, in fact, are quite diverse in nature. Let's try to run down some of the basic elements that we would have to consider. Poverty, certainly, the lack of jobs, the absence of hope in the future, the ongoing search for a means to get by, the armed conflicts that seek to exploit natural resources, a sense of injustice, exclusion, frustrations that are born of an inequitable and unfair distribution of national wealth, the absence of state institutions or extreme weakness of the same, electoral problems that come from ethnocentric claims at ongoing cleavages that are either professional or religious in nature, the loss of moral and ethnic values, and certainly world geopolitical struggles that are being carried out on African soil. So, Madam President, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, that is the background. Let me now look at the security situation in Central Africa as I see it. First, we have the situation in the east of the DRC, which has been explosive for a very long time. It is less intense than it once was, but remains fragile and requires ongoing vigilance. Second, the more recent phenomenon of piracy on the seas in the Gulf of Guinea, which has become extraordinarily worrisome. Third, terrorism that reaches from the Sahel towards the south of the continent and that has outbursts in a number of different localities. I can mention, for instance, here the Boko Haram sect, which has Nigeria in its grip and is trying very hard to extend its tentacles toward the Cameroon and, who knows, the Central African Republic in the next few days, if one doesn't watch it. Fourthly, the Lord's Resistance Army of Joseph Kony that continues to be present in the Central African Republic and the DRC and in Uganda. Finally, the socio-political and security crisis that the Central African Republic has been facing, it remains worrisome, and this despite numerous initiatives undertaken for peace and security by the Community of Central African States, the African Union itself, France, the European Union, the United States, and the United Nations. The lack of security and grave violations of the rights of man are rampant. It is estimated that somewhere between 10 and 20% of the 4 million citizens of Central Africa have been displaced because of the current crisis. Despite this grim picture, let us pinpoint a few glimmers of hope. In December 2013 in Nairobi, the former rebellious group M23, which was rooted in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, began abandoning its armed conflict and adopting a law of amnesty. At the same time, in the eastern region of the DRC, the disarming of the combatants of the Ugandan Liberation Army and the FDLR, the Rwandan rebels, is ongoing. As to the Central African Republic, my own country, Congo, which serves as international mediator, as established by the African Union and the United Nations, has hosted the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd July, just recently, in Brazzaville, an inter-Central African dialogue. This is a first step, a first stage in a process that will deepen in Central Africa itself. The parties in conflict came to Brazzaville and signed a treaty of cessation of hostilities, even if, as we have learned this morning, there are always those who are eager to break the ceasefire. There have been a few instances of combat to the north of Bangui, and a number of deaths were noted, 20 principally among civilians. These glimmers of hope, nonetheless, show the success of African initiatives toward the preservation of peace.
pour la promotion de la
The
paix et de la
African
sécurité
institutional framework that has been set up to promote peace and
la
security
principale d'entre elles.
is, without question, the main reason for hope.
De ce cadre institutionnel,
The first element of that institutional framework that I'd like to point out is the peace architecture,
sa vocation est d'assurer la
the architecture for
prévention
peace
des
and
règlements des
security
conflits
in Africa,
sur le
which
continent,
aims to
en
ensure
s'appuyant
the
sur un instrument
prevention of
opérationnel
conflicts and to
dont
ensure
le
solution
montage
of
est en
these
cours.
via
Il s'agit de la
operational
force
instruments
africaine
that
en
are
attente.
being crafted as I speak. We're talking about
Le deuxième instrument du cadre
African
est le pacte de
force that
non-agression
stands in
et de
readiness.
défense commune de l'Union
A second
africaine.
element, a second instrument
Il a
of
été
that
adopté à
framework
Abuja, au
is the
Nigeria,
Non-Aggression Pact
le 31
for the
janvier
common
2005,
defense of the African Union. It
à
was adopted in
l'initiative
Abuja,
de la République
in
du
Nigeria, in 2005, the
instrument
31st of January of that year.
est la
This
force
was an initiative
d'intervention
initially
rapide
of
en
the
cas de
Republic
conflit.
of Congo.
C'est
And
le
it is the
dispositif
first line of
de
defense
l'aide
in the case of
opérationnelle
conflict. That is
dès
our last
2015.
instrument. It would be a fast intervention
Outre
force,
le cadre institutionnel
which should
africain
become
pour la
operational
promotion de la
in
paix et de la
2015.
sécurité, des mécanismes régionaux
Quick
de paix et de
mobilization where needed.
sécurité
Beyond
ont
this
également été mis en
institutional
place. Ce
framework
sont
for peace and security,
le Conseil
there
de
are
paix et de
various
sécurité,
regional
COPAC,
mechanisms
la communauté
for peace and
économique
security that
des
have
États
also
d'Afrique
been
centrale.
set up, and I'd like to mention a few of these here.
Le pacte
We
sur la
have the
paix,
Council for Peace
la
and
stabilité et
Security
le développement
of
dans la
the
région des
Central
Grands Lacs,
African states,
l'accord
the
cadre pour la paix,
Pact
la
for
sécurité et la coopération
Peace,
pour
Stability,
la
and
République
Development of the
démocratique
Great
du
Lakes
Congo
region.
et la région des Grands Lacs.
There's also the Framework Agreement for Peace and
Mesdames et
Security and
messieurs,
Cooperation in the DRC and the
Pour
Great Lakes
revenir à
region.
l'action de mon pays,
Ladies
le
and gentlemen,
Congo,
let me come back now to the
j'indiquerai
action that
que
my
nous
own
n'avons
country, the
jamais fait
Congo,
l'économie d'efforts
has undertaken in this
dans la
context.
quête de la paix,
And I would like to point out
de la
here
stabilité
that
et
we
de la
have been
sécurité en
unstinting
Afrique.
in our efforts for peace
En
and
Afrique du
stability
Sud,
and security
sous
in
l'apartheid,
Africa. In South Africa under
au Darfour,
apartheid, in Darfur,
Sahel,
in the Sahel,
dans la région
in
des
the
Grands
Great
Lacs,
Lakes region.
le Congo
In
a
all of
toujours
these
répondu
places,
positivement
the
aux
Congo
appels
has
ayant pour objectif
always been
la
present
promotion
and
de
made
la
its presence
réconciliation
felt
nationale,
in a constructive manner
de la paix et de la
in
sécurité.
the promotion of peace and security and national reconciliation.
Sous l'apartheid,
In the case of South Africa under
très
apartheid,
heureux de rencontrer
I am very
ici
pleased
même
indeed
l'ambassadeur
to see here
Cohen,
Ambassador Cohen.
avec lequel nous avions activement
We worked
travaillé.
quite actively and quite closely with Ambassador Cohen, and I greet him and I'm pleased to see him here. And also Undersecretary Coker. Together we worked very hard to bring South Africa, Angola, and Cuba together, work for the retreat of Cuban troops in Angola and the independence of Namibia, but a few of the areas in which we collaborated. To illustrate, I will speak briefly about specific action my country has undertaken in the DRC and in the Central African Republic. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, my country plays the role of facilitator in the national dialogue, bringing the main political factions together. In the Central African Republic, the Congo is contributing in various forms and fashions toward search for solutions to the conflict. Let me mention but a few. Amongst others, we sent 1,000 men to participate in the peacekeeping contingent co-sponsored by the African Union and the UN Security Council. The Congo is also the mediator as between the armed conflict and the opposing political forces. My country has also offered a loan to the Central African state in order to ensure at least minimal functioning of its public administration. Ladies and gentlemen, whatever the presence or the intensity of armed violence and terrorist threats, we can never forget the many other challenges that Africa must face and take up in order to ensure its security in the long term. And this brings me precisely to the second main point of my speech to you today. That is the multidimensional character of our security challenge. As independent nations that we are, most African countries are only about 50 years old. This relative youth for us Africans cannot certainly excuse any mistakes or weaknesses on our part, but it is useful, I believe, to bear it in mind in the overall historical perspective that I believe we must take. And I would like here to insist on the need to remember the time element, the dimension in terms of history that our young African countries offer. The turmoil that we live, in fact, is very much the cut and thrust, the ups and downs of our adolescence, as it were, of our young adulthood, as it were, as emerging nations that we are, as states that are becoming full-fledged, of institutions that are consolidating, of democracies that are seeking maturity, of economies that are emerging. And so the notion of security, I believe, must be put in a context that goes beyond the question of defense, and one that addresses the viability itself of our states. This is how I believe we must cast the matter in terms of our broader political, economic, and social development. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, the lack of security is often the very result of a number of problems that converge, most especially, surely, poverty and injustice. Poverty is, without question, the first factor in lack of security. And all this, I think, must be looked at in the face of the enormous challenge that Africa has to construct simultaneously in terms of our nations, of the state, of democracy, of the rule of law, and good governance. Surely this should urge our partners to be a little more patient, at a minimum level at least more realistic and pragmatic, and, dare I say it, a little more humble in their assessment of our young nations. Furthermore, the concept of the nation-state itself, so firmly rooted in the philosophy and political culture of Europe, is a recent idea in Africa. Here, the arbitrary manner in which the continent was carved up following the Berlin Conference in 1885 and the subsequent colonization has in fact turned our countries into fragmented ethnic entities. And so, dear friends, your country has two major political parties and a limited number of other groups. You may be surprised to learn that we African countries juggle, in some instances, hundreds of parties. Can you imagine how hard that is? How can we foster a multi-party approach while at the same time guarding against perilous ethnic quarrels that can be of religious or regional origin? How can we safeguard the integrity of our fragile states and the unity of our young nations when we face centrifugal forces that stem from a mistaken usage of political pluralism and a mistaken notion of democracy itself? The burgeoning of lasting democracy is something that will take time, that is laborious, that is intensive, and it's something that the peoples themselves must carry out, as they will, following the rhythm of their own drum. History is full of studies of this sort. When I cast my mind back to 1789, and I look back to the emerging French Revolution under the slogan Liberté, Fraternité, Égalité, equality, fraternity, and liberty, we know that women certainly didn't get the vote. By the way, they got it after World War II. So sometimes good things take time. Stability and a minimum of order certainly is essential to security. This is what will anchor a climate in which freedom and economic and social progress will flourish. Having tried to paint a picture of the security situation in Central Africa, one that encompasses the very notion of security, that must necessarily address the challenges of democratization and development, I'd now like to move to my third and last point in this set of remarks. And here I will home in on the expectations of Africa as to its cooperation with the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, I call for a deepening, dare I say, a regrounding of relations between Africa and the United States of America. It seems to me that Africa and the USA are two continents that ignore each other rather than recognizing everything that should bring them together. It's time to change this anomalous state of affairs. And specifically to that end, I would offer America 5 propositions. First, I invite the United States to intensify the training and equipping of African defense forces so that Africa is in a position to ensure its own security. That's point 1. Secondly, I invite the United States to work with the whole of Africa. I say this because I have said at some point that with regard to the electrification program that President Obama has spoken of, a number of countries were chosen, and I would like here to urge that it's the whole of Africa that should be the partner in that instance, not just a handful of countries. The whole of Africa, of course, remaining bewaring, I should say, of prejudice or oversimplification or any facile characters of any element. I also envisage a solid partnership and a broad partnership in the field of education between Africa and the United States. The United States, which has the best universities in the world. I also urge the U.S. to support and accompany our efforts to consolidate integration in Africa. I invite the United States to become more present also in African economic affairs, now quite competitive. This country, which so celebrates the spirit of competition, should surely face it, wherever it may come from. And the U.S. will find a very important and productive place, perhaps a pride of place in Africa, which offers such promise and is rightly described as the continent of the future. Distinguished guests, I would like to conclude these remarks by offering the 3 following messages. First, the necessary buttressing of security in Africa is essential, not only for itself, but for its development partners. Second, security in Africa is a matter much vaster than military security alone. It is multidimensional. Third and last, America has a great deal to offer Africa.
beaucoup à recevoir.
but it also has a lot to receive from Africa.
Madame la Présidente, de World Africa
Madam
Council,
President of the World Affairs
Monsieur le
Council,
Président du National
Mr. President
Press
of
Club,
the National Press Club,
distingués invités,
distinguished guests, ladies
mesdames
and
et
gentlemen,
messieurs, je vous remercie
let me
pour
thank you
votre
very
attention.
much for your kind attention.
L'oreille est trop grosse. Trop grosse.
Okay.
Vous allez m'aider là? C'est fait, c'est bon?
Thank you very much for your speech. We now will have our traditional question and answer session. Sir, we are just a few days away from the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. What do you hope this gathering will achieve?
Mais je l'ai pratiquement exprimé tout à l'heure.
Well, I think
En 5 points. C'est
I expressed that expectation in the 5 propositions that I made. Let me certainly begin by stating that it is a deep honor for us to meet with President Obama. We thank him for convening this summit
mais je voudrais pas me redire
in
parce
the
que
framework of his ongoing efforts.
hier, moi, mes attentes, je venais de
But in
formuler
terms of
en
my
5
expectations
points dans la
per se,
déclaration
I
que
really
je
summed them up in the general remarks I offered and the 5 proposals I made toward the end.
Thank you. Do you think African governments and the United States have a serious economic partnership that will allow for broader economic development and lower unemployment? What more needs to be done?
Je l'ai dit en quelques mots, je crois que
Well, in a very
le
brief
continent africain,
answer, I would simply say that
c'est un peu
the
en
African
partie
continent
l'avenir de ce monde.
is,
On dit que
in a
ce
sense, the hope of the world.
appartient
Many have said that this is Africa's century.
à regarder de près.
And if we look at
les
things
analystes,
closely
les
and
observateurs
follow
s'accordent à dire
everything that analysts and observers say, it would appear that the set of measures that African leaders have taken and the growth
qui sont
that is registered in the continent, the potential that is offered at present in Africa, that would be true. I spoke of the wealth that Africa has on its surface and underground, but I also spoke of its people. Analysts say that by 2050, there will be 2 billion inhabitants in Africa. This is the continent of the future, we believe, and a great powerhouse, I believe, as the United States itself is. That is my deepest conviction.
Recently, the Republic of Congo mediated a ceasefire between factions at war in the Central African Republic. What is the status of that agreement? What more needs to be done to end the violence?
nous pensons qu'après 3 jours de discussion,
We believe that after 3 days of intense discussion in Brazzaville, at which all parties were present,
convenus,
the agreement to sign an agreement to cease hostilities is certainly noteworthy. That was certainly the first step forward. All friends of the Central African Republic should certainly bolster that decision and help the country to respect its decision and stand by its commitment so that the organization of the state can in fact occur. The state in Central African Republic is quite weakened and needs help. We also need to ensure that the free flow of people and goods occurs within the four corners of the Central African Republic. All of this will certainly help the NGOs and other friends who are so inclined to come and lend a helping hand within the country and in the neighboring countries. I think above all, this should pave the way for the populations, the peoples that were in strife for religious reasons, to achieve a meeting of the minds, to come together yet again. We know that the Christians, the Muslims, the animists in the past got along very well and lived in peace for years. And therefore, square one had to be a cessation of hostilities. Without it, it would be, frankly, quite difficult to imagine the holding of elections in the Central African Republic. And I think a key part of the decisions taken in Brazzaville recently will have to be rooted in further work to be accomplished within the country, always efforts toward reconciliation. And eventually, a large reconciliation forum could be organized in Bangui itself, where all would participate. And I certainly exhort all friends of the Central African Republic to rally round and help us see that day. This is a logic of peace and reconciliation. And I think it is offering some hope, as it did in Brazzaville.
Turning the subject to a subject that is on page one of newspapers around the world, it seems inevitable that Ebola will spread. Have you or do you intend to meet with other African heads of state to create a comprehensive regional plan to address the disease? And what is Congo's plan to deal with Ebola if the virus spreads?
Well, we have already had to face that challenge twice. The Ebola epidemic has struck us. So this is not something that may happen. It has already occurred. And I believe that when one faces such exigent circumstances, it is essential that draconian measures be taken to render the area affected as secure as possible, to try to sanitize as best as possible the general area and avoid the spread of the epidemic. And as I say, we have in the past had to struggle with this specter. And at the time, I say, we took draconian measures. We isolated the area, we offered treatment to those who were afflicted, and we eradicated the epidemic. Not long ago, just before taking the plane to come here, my good friend Condé was on the phone with me. I wanted news because, of course, there's a great deal of activity in Conakry, and the president of Côte d'Ivoire, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea are meeting in Conakry to discuss the very thing. And I do believe they are considering very, very serious measures to try to stop this as best they can. But I'm quite certain, and you are yourself, I'm sure, the entire international community must lend a hand. This is bigger than all of us.
Turning to Congo domestically, Congo has had robust economic growth, and the latest IMF report from Congo was positive. Tell us, sir, how you plan to invest more of Congo's wealth to improve the health, education, and economic welfare of your citizens.
Je dois dire que
Let me
en
say
matière
that
d'éducation,
with regard to education, if I can turn to that first,
notre pays a toujours
our
été,
country has always
en ce qui concerne le taux de scolarisation,
been very, very strict about improving the enrollment of children at schools. And we've always been at the top of the list of countries doing most to that end. And we're at 100% enrollment of kids
dans
at
notre
school.
pays,
Now,
et les enfants en âge d'aller à l'école, où qu'ils se trouvent,
wherever children are in my country, they go to school.
et l'enseignement
And
officiel
official
gratuit
education is offered free up until the age of 16. So, free public education through the age of 16
aux enfants
to youngsters
de 6
everywhere, wherever they are, from
et
6 years of age through 16 years of age. And I think it's a fair point to say, without exaggeration, that when we take a look at the state of our budget, this is a quite considerable achievement. About 25%, I'm talking about a fourth of our budget, is earmarked for education.
de renforcer ce système.
I think that's significant.
Parce que
And we are, in fact, strengthening the system because, okay, we have 100% enrollment. All of that is fine and well. But we are looking now at the quality, at the level. We're training the trainers now, putting great emphasis on that, improving the school infrastructure. There's a lot to be done. We are, at present,
les lycées
building high schools in every one of the provinces of our country, including the equivalent of charter schools, the high caliber, excellent level high schools, and are building a university in Brazzaville. Our country has always laid great store by education.
What are you doing to improve the private sector in the country to make it less dependent on the West and more self-sustaining?
Bon, d'abord, le gouvernement
Well,
est en train de
let me
prendre,
say first that the government has been taking significant steps to improve the business environment,
une dimension importante.
to create an enabling business environment.
Moins de bureaucratie.
Less red tape, less bureaucracy. Our Minister of Finance is here,
Mes institutions pour
and he
être
always knows that I'm very clear about how much I insist on him doing what he can to avoid the mushrooming of levies and taxes, things that make business ever more difficult. We want to move towards simplification. We also have with us our minister who is tasked with small and medium-sized enterprises, and they can tell you that we are very, very much aware of how critical it is to foster an enabling business environment for small and medium-sized enterprises, to set up a single window at the customs level, the one-stop shop, as they call it. And the government, above and beyond that, is setting up a fund, a guarantee fund, to assist
les entreprises, les petites et moyennes
these small and medium-sized enterprises of the private sector
entreprises, se développer.
to get going and to grow strong. This guarantee fund, we hope,
aux jeunes, surtout
will help the young, particularly, who are entrepreneurs, who have something to give, who are interested in doing something, to get the necessary loans from lending institutions under the overall guarantee fund that the government is now offering to that end. Let me say a word about our external
les
partners.
frontières du Congo sont ouvertes.
The borders of the Republic of Congo are wide open. And we have seen how business partners have come to us from very far away as Australia, certainly Europe, the United States, and are active in various sectors of our economy. And we are all in favor of that. We're very pleased to see it because this will spur the development of our SMEs, but also certainly will redound to the benefit of our larger companies in the sectors of oil, iron ore, phosphates, and numerous others important industries that exist in our country. At the government level, we have set clear guidelines, set a clear course for the next 15 years, such that a major investment will be made in the industrialization and the modernization of the country. Our vision of industrialization will be certainly also based on the development of agro-industry and agriculture, both.
You have been in office a lengthy period, and according to term and age limits set forth in your country's current constitution, your second and final term as president ends in 2016. There is talk of efforts to amend the Constitution to allow you to serve a third term. Do you support these efforts? And if successful, will you seek a third term? And you have to realize we are getting ready for our own American presidential election in a few years, where there are term limits. But a number of people are inquiring about your future plans.
Bien, sur cette question constitutionnelle,
On the matter of constitutional reform, there is ongoing discourse in my country on this subject. That's no secret. And people are debating legitimately whether this makes sense, whether the Constitution should be reformed. Not so much, let me say, because of me personally. The issue has to do with the limits that are set in the Constitution. This is not a question of one or another person. It is truly a constitutional issue. So the debate is being held. It is a free debate, and people are giving the matter some thought. Should the Constitution be reformed to allow further mandate? That is something that the people of the Republic of Congo themselves will have to decide, and there would have to be a referendum to that effect. So it's entirely up to them. It will, in any event, be the people itself that will speak out. This cannot be in any way something that flows from any one individual's desire to cling on to power. This is a bigger and broader question. It's an open question, and one that really has to do with our future, with the visage that the country itself has of itself. So I just let the debate go on, and we'll see where it takes us.
Thank you. In my introductory remarks, I mentioned how you are devoting your government to protecting human rights. Nevertheless, there are some human rights organizations, such as Amnesty International and Freedom House, who feel there are still restrictions on press freedoms, the rights of assembly, and the rights of free expression. As you answered the previous question so thoroughly, I wonder if I could ask you, what will you do to continue to advance such freedoms in your country?
Mais elles existent. Je vous parlais
Well,
tout à l'heure
these freedoms exist.
de pays
I spoke earlier of countries in Africa that have numerous different political parties. I think in the case of the Congo, for 4 million inhabitants, we have, let me see, I think 150 political parties at last count, give or take a few. These are legally established, formally incorporated political parties that carry on their activities as they see fit. There are trade unions that are freely established and are certainly very free in conducting their business as they see it. And the press is perfectly free in my country. We are, I think, in a sense, a mecca for the press. There isn't any freer press than the press in the Congo. There is a law that has been voted upon by Parliament that protects journalists. No journalist can be arrested or thrown into prison for his or her opinions. The freedom of the press, freedom of speech are absolutely guaranteed by law in the Republic of Congo. And so, if 150 political parties are conducting their business freely, and trade unions and the press too, I don't know a single person who has been detained for his or her opinion. The NGOs are free. As I say, there's freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. I think it's a reach to think that there is a limit. I think there's quite abundant freedom, at least as far as I can tell.
Thank you. I thought it was important to ask the question, and I'm pleased you gave a very detailed answer. We are almost out of time, but before asking the last question, we have a couple of housekeeping matters to take care of. First of all, I'd like to remind you about our upcoming events and speakers. On Monday, August 4th, His Excellency Jacob Zuma, President of South Africa, will be our guest of honor on the 20th anniversary year of Nelson Mandela speaking at the National Press Club as president. And I'm pleased that we have with us today as a distinguished guest His Excellency Ibrahim Rasool, the Ambassador of South Africa. Thank you. On September 17th, John G. Stump, CEO of Wells Fargo, will be with us. And on September 19th, Larry Merlo, President and CEO of CVS Corporation. And stay tuned for more speakers planned by our Speakers Committee under Jerry Zaremski and Donna Leinwalt for the remainder of the year. And now, I'd like to present you, sir, with our traditional National Press Club mug, which we are always pleased to do for our distinguished leaders. I know you may have other mugs, but this one is very special. And I would like to ask, if you could just look at our photographer there. I'd like to ask any journalist who interviews President Sassou Nguesso in his office to report back to me if you don't see that mug there.
Well, I will take my morning tea in this mug. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our final question is generally in a lighter mood, but this is a question not meant to be light or serious, but a real practical issue. How often is your country confused with the Democratic Republic of Congo, and how do you handle such errors?
Comment?
How often is your country confused, the Republic of Congo, with the Democratic Republic of Congo? And how do you handle such misunderstandings?
Oui, mais c'est tout le temps que cela
How often?
se passe.
All the time. And we'd like very much for the DRC to become Zaire again. That would do it.
I wondered a while but whether I should ask that question, and I'm glad I did. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, and thank you all for coming today. Standing ovation. And thank you to you all. Thank you again to our partners in the World Affairs Council, D.C. We are adjourned.
Please return your receivers to the table outside. The meeting is adjourned.
And please return your translating devices to the table outside. Thank you.